Hi everybody, I'm Alan Berecka, librarian at Del Mar College,
And I'm Sara Kaplan, Associate Professor of English at Del Mar College.
and we're here today in the Anzaldúa Plaza to honor and talk about our friend and mentor Mike Anzaldúa and read you a few poems. And Sarah's gonna start.
Okay, so when I first came here as a new faculty member, Mike was really welcoming, and he was a great mentor. And he invited me to one of the concerts from the music department, and it just really made me feel kind of special. And I was sitting between him and our dean at the time, and at the concert, and it was just something that just made me feel very special. And when he retired, his office, he adjuncted for a while. His office was next to mine at the time, and he would used to just kind of come by and stand. And he had a stance with his cowboy boots. He would stand in the doorway of my office, and we would talk. And I used to stay there for a while. And he used to he had these night classes, and he often would tell me, go home, Sarah. He would just sort of take care of new faculty, and we often had these tuna fish sandwiches for lunch. And so he was just a really good mentor, and I appreciated him a lot. So with that, I'm going to start with two poems, and the first one is called Casing the House. The Shoal Creek vitex against the brick spikes 12-inch fragrant flowers of deep lavender blue by May and a second flush in August. You keep the tree shapely and tame. Until the dark, you stand in the yard with your clippers, undecided. Butterflies and hummingbirds never stop except when the dark root of electricity grows through the rain. When the early morning wakens, you put handfuls of rose glow over the knockout roses in the bed by the back fence and feel the ground for water. You try to make things grow. You try to keep order, prune. And here it comes, the dry light. Cobwebs form in the shrubs. You inspect the eaves with a broom and recaulk and repaint the siding along the patio. I can imagine the torment at the lift and rot and spill and tear and crack of paint and wood and brick, glowing imperfections, and you go around the house looking for something broken you cannot fix. That was a new poem. This one's also kind of new. It's called Bloom Time. The evening settles into the slow rain, and the white painted cedar wood disappears into the fog. We cannot control our doubt, but we think we can disappear into the open air, afraid to leave behind what we cannot mend, after we tinkered around and broke nearly everything except the blue-greens of the Little John bottle brush against the fence, and the leaves near the base, egg-shaped and pointed. The bright red flower spikes at the end of the branches, cut the fog like Chinese lanterns. After flowering, cup-shaped fruit capsules appear in clusters along the stems, and as they age, like us, they fall off throughout the season, only to grow full and young again in the warm rain.
Thank you, Sarah. My favorite Mike Anzaldúa story is I'm the grandson of 4 immigrants from Eastern Europe, and when I got down to South Texas, I just hated being called Anglo. And so I wrote a poem about it, and then I looked at the poem and I went, ooh, maybe this crosses a line or two. I didn't know who to show it to, so I went over to Mike's office and I said, Mike, can I read you this poem? And I did, and I said, you think it's okay? And he was laughing, and he liked the poem. He said, no, it's fine, go with it. And that weekend I was the featured reader at a conference up in Georgetown, Texas, and I read the poem, and the editor of the San Antonio Express poetry part was in the audience. He came up and he asked me if he could have the poem to be published. And when I got back that weekend, I told Mike, or the next week I told Mike, and he was very pleased. Unfortunately, Mike died before it appeared in the paper. But here's the poem. It's called Born Again, Polish in South Texas. Judging from Juan's face, I shouldn't have said, funny, ain't it? whenever the diversity committee brings someone in, they're always Hispanic. Juan put down his menu and starts to talk about the lack of Mexican media role models, and then says, "You Anglos just don't understand." And I think to myself, Anglo? As if I was not raised on Kapusta, Kobasa, Pierogi, and Ongonquit. As if my grandparents had not spoken broken English at their mill jobs and native tongue while at home. As if as a kid I did not have to listen to Louis B. Ziggy and Kowski spin Little Wally polkas every Sunday on the ride to Mass. As if the last smart Polak on TV was not Banachek, played by George Papard, who really was an Anglo. As if ever since I moved to South Texas, my history had been erased, whitewashed into some tea-swilling, scone-eating, queen-loving Englishman. But Juan is a good friend, and since we are all guilty of painting the other with broad strokes, I nod and say, maybe so. I reach across the table and dunk a corn chip into our salsa. We sit quietly, reading our menus, considering our next course. My poems are a lot longer, so Sarah's gonna go next.
I have these little lyrics I love. So this one's called Feeling Lucky. I thought of this one after my mother had visited. So we drive past the wind turbines on our way to the cattle ranch. The winter feels like galvanized wire. Snow builds on the corners of the windows, and we all almost lose our way, like the end of a perfect day. But we grow hard and change, frozen over inside. Somehow, we must get through the evening. The quiet muffles everything, even the days when anything might happen, a strange excitement. This one came from my parents, actually. I asked my mother what one of her fondest memories of her and my father was. So I have trouble pronouncing the title, so excuse me. It's called Ongonquit Beach. You lose your calendar and end up in Ongonquit, next to a window to watch the sunset and eat roast duck, topped with cherry sauce. In the twilight, you walk on the summer beach, and 11 p.m. feels like 11 a.m. For a week, the distance between early morning and evening is clear and crisp.
One last story about Mike. I've been a librarian here for, I guess, 24 years now. And we're remodeling the White Library on the East Campus, so I had to move out of my office. And I was digging stuff out of the filing cabinet, throwing away most of it, and I came upon this article from the Foghorn, and it's an article they did after my second book had been published. And I thought, wow, that's really weird. I don't remember cutting this out. And then I flipped it around, and it was Mike who had cut it out, and he'd written a note saying how proud the school was of my success with poetry, and he signed it Mike Anzaldúa. So suddenly it became a great relic instead of something I wanted to throw away. When I think of Tache and all the other things that touch the Moss program here at Del Mar, I think of my first boss, a great guy named Noe Guerra. And this next couple poems I'm going to read are feature Noe. First poem is called When You're a Stranger, from Jim Morrison. Still new to Corpus, I arrived at work one morning to find my boss, Noe Guerra, in a complete tizzy. English was his second tongue, and I hadn't mastered his accent yet, so I thought he was saying over and over again that we had to clean our area because the Puerto Ricans were coming. I was stumped. Why the world's calmest man had been transformed into a Mexican Paul Revere, trumpeting the arrival of a bunch of Puerto Ricans. Hell, I thought, I'm from New York. I know Puerto Ricans. My cousin's even married to one. a fantastic woman named Wilma, a nurse, not a neat freak. So I said, Noe, relax. The Puerto Ricans won't mind our mess. Noe's face fell into that look that means, what the? In any language. He slowed his diction down, raised his voice and pitched as if he were talking to a partially deaf toddler, and said, Alan, I'm not saying Puerto Ricans. I'm saying Board of Regents. Our clutter disappeared. Around the same time, I was getting used to hearing Spanish spoken in the streets, so many of which bore Spanish names. I asked Noe, where does Leopard Street go? Noe's face went straight to, what the? He replied, what street? I repeated, Leopard. We don't have a Leopard Street. No, it's a huge sign at the end of Crosstown. A flash of recognition broke across his face, and then Noe broke into laughter, laughed harder and longer than I thought possible. Finally, he looked at me, tears dancing in his eyes. Alan, I thought you had 2 degrees in English. It's not leopard, it's leopard. I blushed and feared I'd never master life in Corpus Christi.
Great, thanks, Alan. So this one's called Biking to the Malakites, which I did a long time ago, and I didn't wear any sunscreen, and I didn't bring enough water, which was really stupid. Anyway, I got a great poem out of it, and I'm glad I'm alive. So, of course the dunes never get sunstroked. They roll like beach wheat and pelt from the south. I burn along the sea. Tropical buckeyes and scorched mussels lead me through the mud flats in search of an anticyclonic storm, the great red spot. I pretend this place is Jupiter and suck hard on my camelback across from Bird Island Basin Road, where there's a shack, and bike the Central Flyway. My skin cooks and tightens. I think of October and the bitter panicum, sea oats, Gulf Dune, and drop seed to lead me to the end. With the forbs of beach morning glory, railroad vine, and prairie senna, still a lonely ride. This one's called Sundogs, with an epigraph from Vladimir Nabokov. One opal cloudlet in an oval form reflects the rainbow of a thunderstorm. In a halo of diamond dust, fog bounces off a man's rearview mirror, and I see him consider me worth stopping for. In circles of refracted light, spun round the top of the sky, I could get lost. My fingers stiffen and crack like forgotten pipes as ice crystals flutter to the ground. If I took off my gloves to hold the freezing water while passers-by pass by, the phantom sun would multiply and the air would clear and warm again. But in a prism of muted light, my reflection becomes saturated by red dogs whose yelps converge into a parhelic circle.
So one's about probably the most important lesson Noe ever taught me. And it's called No Escaping Here and There. There's a story of Piusius Antonovich, my great-grandfather, who rejected for admittance at Ellis Island, went to Canada, snuck into the U.S. by crawling across a railroad trestle. How he found work in a mill in Utica, saved and sent the money back to Lithuania so his wife and kids could follow. It's our family epic. Odysseus had nothing on the man. The trunk my grandfather immigrated with sits in my living room, a relic once stuffed full of tools of a tailor and his handiwork. But with time, we came to look at it as Houdini's prop, one he used in a perilous escape. When I went to Lithuania to read my poetry, my eyes were turned inside out. The people there saw the ones who stayed behind, endured the czars, the wars, the gulags and Stalin, saw these people as the courageous, saw leaving as the softest option. I once asked a friend in South Texas who spoke with a thick Spanish accent where in Mexico his family came from. He got a little miffed. Told me he could trace his family back a few hundred years to the farms around Carn City. Told me they never moved, the border did.
Okay. So these are the last two poems I'm going to read. The first one is called Pinecone Wars. When I lived in Houston when I was a kid, my friend and I, Jared, used to play with the pine cones my parents had as decorative by the house. We used to use them as bombs to play war. So I was thinking of that as I was recently pruning my front yard, and my dog Molly, who passed away recently, was sort of sitting by and watching. So anyway, I don't have pine cones, but I was just thinking of that. So here's the poem, Pinecone Wars. As I trim the boxwoods before the storm, my dog sits by and pants. She's faithful and thirsty. She screams the sky and knows the winds like hooded figures come closer. Piles of brush begin to carry away like old sounds and disappear into a whirling monochrome. The darkness and mulch hides the shears. The sun's gone. All that goes unnoticed gathers into bundles, green twigs and broken brush. I am far from myself. I do all I can, but I'm restless for the mild and silent to unfold. If I stop and recall our imaginary wars long ago in January, with pine cones like toy bombs littering the front lawn, I find myself in a world altered and gone, a tidy, dew-covered hedge. We live in the same muted fog and rain in cities where the night's pale winter sinks and drifts, holding us in dreams where we carve our breath in the sky. Here's the last poem, if I can get to it. Here we go. This one's called Companions, and this one I dedicated to my dog Molly, who had recently passed away. But she had a good life. She was, 15, 16, which is what, 500,000 years in dog years. So good for her. And then I recently got a new border collie puppy. So anyway, this one's called Companions, and I thought this one was a good place to end. So here we go. Down the morning's trail, through the rain's end, across the arched bridge, we follow shadows into the landscape to haunt our bored and reluctant search for something hidden. The graveyard soil changes to dry road, and we spoil ourselves on another summer alone, without quarrels or intimacy, each day mostly like any other. We could bask all day in the sunroom and learn to worry about the grass, rot or renewal, until we fill ourselves with the mud of hope, and our breath labors for flowers in the cracked wind. Thank you.
Yeah, and Sarah and I would like to thank Liz and Javier and everybody else for inviting us to do this. We apologize for the mower. We moved 10, 15 times. Anyways, I want to finish with a love poem, the language that goes beyond all language and words. And it's a poem called Why Matter Might Matter. The more I think about the size of the universe in relation to the size of each of us, I have a hard time thinking anything can matter that consists of such little matter. And yet there is a woman with green eyes who makes me forget the long odds with a certain look and a certain smile, and can make me stop thinking and start living as if there is so much that really does matter.